Good Sunday afternoon, evening, Monday, Tuesday, whenever you're watching this online here at SportsSource.tv. We appreciate you joining us. As usual, I stumble into the open of this because it's not like our TV show. Joined today, we've been talking about Pat Summitt during our show today. You'll see that in the boxes above me up here. You can click on any of those to watch today's show. Joined, as I was on today's show, by Mickey Dearstone, longtime Lady Vols play-by-play man, host of the Pat Summitt Show. Joan Cronin, longtime Tennessee Women's Athletic Director. Pleased to have you here.
Great. Two
former Lady Vols here who I can't start. The list of halls of fame that you two are involved in would take us forever. So Shelley Sexton Collier and Lisa McGill Reagan, welcome to the show. Glad to have you guys with us. I wanted to talk, and this segment, by the way, brought to you as always our overtime segment by Smokin' Joe's, and those folks very much proud to salute the memory of Pat Summitt, as are all of our sponsors today. Wanted to talk about the impact and legacy of Pat Summitt, and I collected some of the statements, and here's the thing, these statements were long. I mean, for example, I'm going to show you something that President Obama said. That was not a tweet. That was not just a quick, brief paragraph. It was 4 paragraphs. It was an entire page on the White House website. So what you're going to see here are the cut-down versions of a lot of comments from a lot of people from various areas, but I just want to run through some of these very quickly. First of all, again, Gino Auriemma, not Knoxville's favorite person, but he said some wonderful things. One would be hard-pressed to name a figure who had a more indelible impact on her profession than Pat Summitt. Then you've got Roy Williams, North Carolina basketball coach. We lost one of the true giants in coaching in any sport, and regardless of gender today. If there were a Mount Rushmore of coaching, Pat Summitt would certainly be included. And then you have Nick Saban, Alabama football coach. Pat Summitt not only meant a lot to college basketball, but she meant a lot to the coaching profession, and her passing is a loss for us all. She set a great example for so many of us with the way she developed student athletes and how she handles success. Nick Saban was one of the most glowing comments. It went on and on about Pat Summitt. And then you have John Calipari at Kentucky. Pat Summitt was a Hall of Famer and true ambassador for our sport. She championed women everywhere and created opportunities for them. Would there be a WNBA without her incredible influence? That answer is no. And then you have Peyton Manning, of course. It would have been a great experience to play for her. She could have coached any team, any sport, men's or women's. Wouldn't have mattered because Pat could flat out coach, part of his statement. Jim Boeheim, Syracuse. She's just a unique coach that is as good a coach that ever coached any sport, men's, women's, football, basketball. She was just as good as you can possibly be as a coach. And then a personal note from the Obamas, I thought this was kind of cool at the end. For 4 decades, she outworked her rivals, made a winning an attitude, loved her players like family, and became a role model to millions of Americans, including our 2 daughters. Now, when you have the President of the United States, and let's take politics out of it, I don't care, Democrat, Republican, all that stuff. The President of the United States put that kind of comment out about a basketball coach. It tells you one thing, much more than a basketball coach.
Absolutely.
In terms of her impact, and it's just, you can't collapse it into a sports impact. It's beyond that in terms of what she meant to women, and I'll extrapolate that a little further, even beyond that. But your thoughts on the outpouring from people across the nation, different fields, different sports, men, women, your thoughts on the impact she had that was made clear by all of these people reaching out and saying things about her.
I'll give you an example. Tuesday after her passing, when I got off the air at 10 a.m., between 10 and 9, I did 15 radio interviews across the country and 5 TV interviews. Now, they weren't just small-time radio stations, KNBR in San Francisco. And when I was talking to them, they said something about her impact as far as the sports world, not just women's basketball. And they said, an example is, here we are in San Francisco talking about Pat Summitt and women's basketball today. It was also Minneapolis, Indianapolis, Detroit. I mean, these were all big city radio stations that wanted to talk about Pat Summitt and her impact in the world of sports.
Joan, the night she passed, there was a moment of silence and a picture of Pat Summitt in the giant video board at Yankee Stadium.
I know, I saved that one. That made my heart just pitter. Pat was more than a basketball coach. We all knew that. But in her passing, there's so many people that have reached out that none of us really thought about them, Pat having an impact. Somebody told me a story, said if Pat was riding in a parade and she waved at somebody and made eye contact, They thought that she was their best friend. I mean, that's the impact she had. Everybody loved Pat, and it was because she gave back. As I said, she's most accomplished and most humble person I've ever known.
You folks both have kids, and I think I'm going to lead this to you. When you look at someone's impact, I mean, there's obviously the straight impact, coach to player. But then there's everything that player takes from that coach and passes on to their players, to their children, and then that goes on and on and on. The impact of Pat Summitt can't simply be measured. The 1,098 victories, that's an incredible number, and as Jim Boeheim added in his statement, if not for the illness, she probably would have coached 15 more years and won 2,000 games. Those numbers, the number of wins is great, but it doesn't even start to begin to define how much of an impact she had on players' lives and their children and everything they pass on.
That is true. I mean, it's really hard to put into words. The way that Pat lived her life every day was an example to everyone that came in contact with her. You hear about the eye contact. You hear, there's so many people that come across her path. But for me personally, with my 4 daughters, Katie, Sydney, Casey, and Brittany, what an honor it has been for me, one of her players, to actually have her presence, with them in a room, and then witness the way that she lived out her life, and the way that she spoke and challenged my own daughters when we were having dinner at her house or whatever it may be. The way that she talked to her dogs and commanded their attention before they ate, and my daughter witnessing the eye contact that the dogs make with her. It just was a lasting impact. And my children have been very honored and blessed, like myself, to have had the opportunity to spend with Pat.
Shelley, the hardest phone call I had to make on Tuesday was to my 10-year-old granddaughter Larkin, who worshiped Pat, and try to explain to her what happened. And she just wanted to know about Coach Pat and how she was and those kind of things. So it wasn't just us, the adults, and the players. It goes on and on and on.
Lisa, your thoughts on this?
I think that one of the big things for me was, even in the early days, it wasn't just about the game of basketball. It was about the game of life. And no matter what situation came up, then there was a life example or something there for you to take when you left. And I catch myself still today when I'm pushed against a wall and backed up and think, okay, how am I going to get out of this? I think, okay, I'm standing on the free throw line. Pat's staring at me with that stare that I probably helped him bent. And we got no time left on the clock, and I've got 2 free throws. What am I going to do? What would Pat do? I'm going to make them. I'm going to survive. I'm going to go to the next level. And that is all from playing for her.
One thing, this will sound like an exaggeration, but I really don't think it is. When you look at our Mount Rushmore, you have 4 presidents up there. Okay, you're not going to remove presidents. But let's start narrowing this thing down. When you look at the impact of one person, let's just say her on her gender. Now, we all know that Pat also impacted many men because of the women she impacted. There are sons that came out of there. There are men that found wives on campuses because. But when you look at just a gender, if you had a Mount Rushmore in this country for women, this is a woman who not only affected all of her Tennessee players, but she made women's basketball something to watch on television, which, she was kind of the rising tide that lifted everything. Do you think gymnastics or softball would be on television now if women's basketball hadn't been the first that you could sell ads for and get eyeballs for? So now you've got women in not just women's basketball, but women in other sports all over the country that their lives changed because she made women's athletics something that little girls say, I'm going to do this and I've got a future in this. Then you've got their kids, their grandkids, you've got the husbands, the boyfriends, girlfriend, whatever. I don't know. I mean, Eleanor Roosevelt, Harriet Tubman, I think you'd put Pat Summitt in that short list of a conversation, and that's separating into women. If you're doing a real take, you'd have to put her on the list of most influential Americans, certainly of the last century. And again, that sounds like hooey that you're just blowing this out of proportion. But if you think about it, it's not.
You know, and she did it without being political.
And I think that's one of the reasons she was loved
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, she didn't.
Great point.
She didn't participate in marches. She wasn't preachy, but. And even when Title IX came down, which anytime the government gets involved, it becomes political. She never really talked about Title IX. It was always about the opportunity for women instead of being Title IX. And she never did put a label on it. So I think the fact that she did it without getting political was another plus, in her favor. And I think that's why it carried so much weight.
That's a tremendous point, and I agree with you 100%.
I do too, Mickey. I think, she wanted. It was you hear people that say walk the walk, not just talk the talk. Pat walked the walk. She wanted to do it right. She always wanted to do what was best for the players. She wanted to work within the university system to make it right. So she did. She walked the walk.
I think she led by example in areas where, yes, what she did, she was a trailblazer in terms of women, but you didn't see her campaigning for left-wing or right-wing politicians. Had great Christian faith, and yet unlike some athletes who, and we'll say two different examples, you have Arian Foster, who's known to, he's an atheist, so he turns his back during the team prayer. You have Tim Tebow, who wears his Christianity on his sleeve. Pat never forced any of her views on anyone, and I think by doing that, by being herself and letting her life tell the story, I think it allows more people to open up to you. When you start politicizing things or trying to convert people to your cause, there's a natural wall that goes up with some people. So I think she lived it and showed it rather than spending a lot of lip talk. And I think that's a great point, that is one of the reasons she was so well loved by everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have to really thank her dad, because he moved her to where she could play basketball. And it goes back that far, and now it's a rippling effect through our children. But, Pat had a gift. The Lord blessed her with a gift to use what she loved as a platform to reach so many people, so many different people. And she took advantage. She felt that was a responsibility for her to use that platform and that gift that she has to create this atmosphere, to create this culture that she built. So it was a day-to-day thing. And you're right about her walk. She didn't have to say anything. She walked in and you knew that, again, you better straighten up. But she had a gift. She was blessed with that gift, and she used it to her fullest every day.
Lisa, anything to close with about your former coach?
One of the best articles I ever read about Pat was actually an article written by Gino Auriemma's daughter, and it was published several years ago. And I guess for the closing statement, in that article it said, no matter what my father does, no matter what my father accomplishes, Pat Summitt did it first.
Pretty impressive.
Just to close, and we talked about Pat's walk and how she didn't have to talk it. I think Luke 12:48 says, to whom much is given, much is expected. Pat certainly gave back day in and day out, and took that very seriously as far as her walk.
I want to thank all of you for being here. I know it's been a rough week, but it's good to, again, I think the mood is starting to change, and people are once again remembering all the joy and the happy things that Pat Summitt brought to not only this area, not only this state, but to folks all over the country, and heck, some people all around the world. Lisa McGill-Reagan, Shelley Sexton Collier, Joan Cronin, Mickey Dearstone. Thank you all for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Honored to be here.
Thank you for watching, and we will see you next Sunday, 11 a.m., WATE 6 for the Sports Source.